Josh Ryzik, and I'm here with Brian Koleski, and this is the first ever episode of the Back of the Endzone podcast. We're pumped to be here, pumped to give you guys our takes on some college football and NFL stuff going on, and just some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today is news in the college football world, stuff to keep an eye out for, what's going on, and Bryant.
And towards the end of the episode, we'll bring you some NFL news that just came in, yesterday, that really ahead of the combine this week, that really will start to shake up the draft, especially with what the Bears will want to do with the number one pick. Does it make it easier for them to move on? Does it make it harder? And this player that we'll be talking about, do they slide in the draft? Does it cause them to drop significantly, and just really it'll shake up the draft, especially at the top.
Yes, so one of the first questions that I kind of want to dive into right away is, with all of the college football realignments and teams moving to different conferences, are college football teams still trying to compete for a national championship? Because right now, to me, I don't know if it really seems like it.
But I think your blue bloods still are. Alabama, of course, Georgia, of course, Ohio State, Michigan, all at the top there. Tennessee is starting to come onto the scene, especially with Josh Heupel. LSU with Brian Kelly. There's a lot of teams out there that are still trying to compete for that national championship, and there's still teams out there trying to get back to that medal, what they once were, like Florida State, Florida, USC. Even though they're moving to a tougher conference in a couple of years, it's really, when you look at it, a majority of the teams really aren't. I don't know if that's controversial to say, but we are here at the University of South Alabama, and you can say the goal is to win a national championship all you want, but really, here it's not. Now once the 12-team playoff comes into play,
that's a different story. 100%.
It becomes a little bit different story, but still, how much is there a gap between the top teams, the Blue Bloods who are already at the top, who are making their way to the top, and then the teams like your lower conference teams, like maybe here in the SEC, like Mississippi State, Ole Miss, or maybe in Big Ten, Penn State, who's seen some success, but
they're right on the fence going into every season and at the end of every season for sure. And I think one of the big things for me, at least, with our teams really competing for a national championship is when we look at these conference realignments. We got Oklahoma and Texas coming into the SEC next year, USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten in 2 years, start of the 2024 season. Then we have UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, all going into the Big 12.
That starts this year.
Exactly, and that starts this year, especially same with the SEC. And with those teams going to those bigger conferences, are they accepting the fate that they're going to be at the bottom? I don't think Texas is among them. Oklahoma, I feel like, is on the fence too, but are they just going to these conferences for money, knowing that they don't have a shot at a national championship or maybe even a conference title?
And I think it seems that way, especially when you look at the media rights that these teams are being dealt. This past fall there was a media deal struck between the Big Ten and CBS and a couple other outlets. I think Fox is still in on it.
Yep, yes sir.
And it was like $7 billion, and think about all the wealth. A big topic that just came through last week is Florida State has expressed their displeasure with the ACC. I got an article right here from CBS. Barrett Sallee, who's great at what he does, he's talking about how their displeasure with the finances, and how really them and Clemson and maybe Miami, if you throw them in there, the market that they're in Florida, really set themselves apart financially from the rest of the teams in the conference, and they want more of a piece of the pie, especially from media rights deals and TV deals. The SEC. Think about the next deal that the SEC will get. They're shifting from CBS to ESPN and a couple other outlets next year as well.
I agree.
And so
I agree, but
TV right deals are huge.
For me, falling back on that main question, are these teams really competing for a national championship? With Florida State, yeah, they draw on tons of revenue. It makes sense for them to want to go to the SEC, but what does it do for their athletic programs going to a conference like the SEC when they're playing against, like, nothing against the ACC? I know the ACC has great competition, and for football though, it's like you look at it every year. Florida State is not even at the top of the ACC for football. They have the potential to get up there. I definitely believe that they do. They were there just a couple
they're on
years
the right
back.
track. I mean, when we start getting into some team analysis and predictions for the season, I do think Florida State will be in the mix for the ACC, especially with what they got coming back, and their recruiting classes are starting to get better and better, and I mean, from where they were a few years ago, they're starting to get better and better, and they're starting to get up to that SEC level to where Clemson is. Clemson has been what they are the past 2 years, but they're
Kind
still
of falling off a little bit,
they're
but
still that premier school in the ACC.
Oh,
and
most definitely.
They might think, we deserve a shot to play against the SEC each and every week.
But for me, coming from maybe a coach's perspective or an athletic director's perspective, I feel like making that move to the SEC, yes, it's good financially, it's great competition, but at that point, what are your odds of winning a conference title or going to a national
especially
championship?
when you're going through the gauntlet, and people bang on SEC fans for saying they're the best conference, and I'll be honest, it is. If you look at the competition in and out of the SEC, the gauntlet of take the SEC West alone. The SEC West is a gauntlet inside and out. When you have to play Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, LSU, A&M, and then in the East is starting to get better. I mean, you got Georgia, who's gone back to back. Tennessee,
Yep.
who was a Hendon Hooker, injury away from possibly being in a rematch with Georgia in the national championship. You have Florida and Billy Napier, who there was some growing pains in their first season, but they're starting to grow. Kentucky is getting better. They got they got Devin Leary, and so the SEC is steadily getting better as far as competition. Now you still got your Missouri and your Vanderbilt, but still I think that Florida State and Clemson and on the other side Texas and OU, if Florida State and Clemson were to join the SEC, I still think they'd have I think they still would have a great shot, and I think Texas and OU, where I think it gets difficult for teams moving, I think it gets difficult for USC and UCLA.
Exactly, and that's what I want to get into, because of the fact that USC and UCLA are on the West Coast, complete opposite side of the country from the whole entire Big Ten region. I know that there's teams way out east, like Rutgers, Penn State, Maryland, they're out east, but think about, obviously, if USC and UCLA are coming into the Big Ten, they're talking about getting rid of the East and West conferences, making everything like international. Everyone will play against one another. Ohio State will obviously still play Michigan every year, games like that. But when USC and UCLA are going to have to get on a 4 or 5 hour plane ride 2 days before the game and come in and play, say, Maryland out east, that's a 3-4 hour time difference, and you have that huge flight. I feel like those guys mentally and physically won't have the time to adjust to an environment like that. And I'm not saying anything against them, but I don't think that the Pac-12 is a super competitive conference. And yes, USC and UCLA are usually at the top of the Pac-12. But them coming into the Big Ten, I feel like football-wise, there's a lot more competitiveness.
And you can kind of get away with that traveling a little bit in football because it is a weekly thing. But talk about other sports like baseball, basketball, where you're traveling, where you could be traveling 2 or 3 times a week. And it's just, it could be difficult and take a toll on your players to where, it might be difficult. Now I think if Florida State and Clemson join the SEC, I think that'll be a cataclysm or a domino effect to maybe not the Pac-12 disassembling, but some of those teams like Oregon, Washington, because
wanting to join.
They were in talks of joining the Big Ten last year, almost immediately after the announcement of UCLA and USC coming. They were in talks of joining either the Big 12 or the Big 10. And I think if you're the Big Ten, if you get a couple of schools like an Oregon or a Utah
It makes it easier
It
for
makes
those
it
teams.
easier,
It does.
especially on travel
It does.
for those two teams and for the other teams. I mean,
I agree, but taking a look back at USC and UCLA, what is going to happen when they actually come to the Big Ten? Because you think about it, Caleb Williams obviously will be a top draft pick next year. Lincoln
he's
Riley is very offensive minded and struggles defensively. Coming into the Big Ten, say his first year, having to play teams like Ohio State, Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, like teams with
well, he could
Minnesota.
probably get away with it against Iowa because
Yeah, Iowa
needs an offense.
Yeah, that is true. But I mean, Iowa's on the verge of even building up their offense. So it's going to be interesting to me to see because the Pac-12, yes, they're a good conference, but I don't think they're anywhere near as good as the Big Ten and the SEC. And I think that them coming to the Big Ten is going to be a huge struggle with the adjustment of travel and just the competitive nature and such a bigger conference, them having to deal with the aspects of the weather. Like, think about USC or UCLA in Michigan or Illinois playing like Northwestern on a November game. That's going to be a huge struggle. Like,
that's where I think, and I was against the 12-team playoff at first. I thought it maybe should have been 8. But now that you look at it and you look at these conference realignments and you look at the stuff that's happening, the shift that's going on in college football, I think it makes it easier on teams because especially teams in tougher conferences like the SEC and Big Ten where they're growing and the competition is growing as well to where you don't have to go undefeated. If Alabama had the season that they just had, going 10-2 and still not making the SEC, but if
they'd be in the 12-team playoff.
They'd still be in the 12-team playoff. They'd be a first round type of team, but they still get a shot at getting in. And even, people say, giving the smaller schools a chance, and that's a big part of it as well. But I think that's just where the beauty of the 12-team playoff comes in because now you don't have to go through the gauntlet of trying to be undefeated.
I agree. Same with 2 years ago when Cincinnati came into the 14 playoff and everyone was like, what the heck? Why are we letting a group of 5 team into the playoff? They did get blown out. It was a nasty game. And
they competed a little bit more than I thought they would. They couldn't match the physicality.
I agree, but I think it's a good thing for the 12-team playoff just to give the group of 5 teams that more – just give them a chance. Give them a chance to compete for a national championship. And it just really stands out because then you got to look Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF again going to the Big 12.
And I think those are teams that are ready to take that leap. Now Cincinnati did lose Luke Fickell to Wisconsin, but Cincinnati has been known for years, going back to when they played a close game against Florida and the Sugar Bowl in 2009, and they nearly beat Florida. Had it not been for a Tim Tebow jump pass.
Yep.
But take teams like Boise State, who's always been in some of that type of mix where, the Statue of Liberty play to beat Oklahoma and the Fiesta Bowl. I mean, some of those teams are ready to make that jump. And UCF, who's seen some success in recent years. Now, as a Bama fan, I do not like them claiming that 2017 national championship.
Trust me. No one does.
But UCF has seen some success. Houston is seeing some success. And I think other teams are starting to see success where they could get ready to make that jump. Like Memphis, for example. I know a guy that played at Memphis who's now here at South. And, we've talked about, the fact that Memphis could be that team. They're ready to take the next leap. Coastal Carolina with their recent success. And you can also start seeing more teams make the jump from FCS to
Exactly,
FBS,
and that's exactly what I was about to.
North Dakota State.
And North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Samford, Montana State, just like how we just saw JMU and Old Dominion make the jump from the CUSA conference over to the Sun Belt. It'll be interesting to see more of these FCS schools making that jump because this year, from the start, JMU and Old Dominion in the Sun Belt were playing pretty good football, and it'll just be interesting to see all these other schools wanting to make the jump to the FBS to get that chance, get more exposure for the school, and all in all, it brings more money in.
And I think the 12-team playoff will tell us a lot. I think it'll tell us a lot of still where the skill gap is between those teams and the bigger schools, because let's just be honest, there still is a gap.
Oh.
I mean, you saw I'm bring up the Sugar Bowl this year. Fifth ranked Alabama, who lost 2 games on the road, beat a Big 12 champion in Kansas State who had beaten TCU, who was in the national championship game.
Exactly.
Now, I'm not saying Bama deserved to get into the playoff or not. I mean, they didn't.
You are.
But no, I'm not saying it that way at all. But what I'm saying though is there's still a gap between some of the top teams and some of the lower teams in the top 10 and the top 12. So it'll really tell us where we are. And I've always been of the belief that maybe the Power Five should, and I think it's coming. I don't know when, and it's been talked about in the college football community for a while, where the Power Five or whatever is left of the Power Five, wherever they go after conference realignment, and after those dominoes fall, break off and have their own championship.
Most definitely, yes.
Which would be the premier championship in college football.
Yes.
But smaller schools like the Group of Five, like the Sun Belt, like the Conference USA,
like the MAC conference,
the MAC, those teams can have their own championship, and it would mean more for those teams. I mean, I know being a student here at South, I mean, I would love nothing more than to see South win a national championship,
but that's the odds of that happening.
But that's
even
out of the realm of possibility.
Exactly. Even with the 12-team playoff, it's like looking at March Madness as a perspective. Like, miracles do happen, but football is a completely different story. Looking at just the physicality aspect and the toughness of schedule that like the Big Ten and SEC have compared to the Sun Belt or the Mountain West. Like those schools are not playing anywhere near as tough as schools, and you know what I'm saying. Like it's going to be tough.
But like, I mean, I'm ready to see how this shakes up. Like this season, the 23 season is really
the last
kind of season as we know it. Like, you won't see Texas and Oklahoma
and the Big 12
anymore. They've been in it forever. You won't see UCLA and USC in the Big 10. I mean, in the Pac-12.
Then Cincinnati's making that jump to the Big 12. I'm very interested, just throwing this out there, to see how Cincinnati does without Luke Fickell. Because Luke Fickell was what was holding that team together. And I'm excited for him at Wisconsin. As a Big Ten fan, I think what he's bringing to Wisconsin is going to be fun to watch, and Wisconsin is going to be back in their glory days.
And Bama starts off the 2024 season at Wisconsin. That'll be a good one to watch. But taking a look back on it, I mean, you talk about the tradition of college football and like how people say it's like this conference realignment and all this stuff could be destroying the tradition. Well, a lot of times tradition changes, and sometimes it needs to change. And I'm not saying it needs to change for college football, but I like the idea of it changing. I think it could change for better or for worse. It really depends on how they start managing this NIL and transfer portal stuff.
I agree with you, and I think for me, it all draws back to that first question. All these realignments, it's like how many teams in each conference are going to get a shot at that 12-team playoff? Because you got to give some G5 teams a shot. You know what I'm saying? Like some of those schools are going to get into the 12-team playoff, and in a conference like the SEC and the Big Ten, where they're going to have USC, UCLA, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, and the SEC, Bama, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, with Arch Manning or Quinn Ewers. It's like the thing is, are those teams giving up that shot to try and I know they're not. I know like those teams are obviously those teams still want a national championship, but it's making it that much harder for them. It's going to make it fun to watch, most definitely. And
people talk about like it destroying rivalries and stuff like that, which I mean I can agree with. I mean I like some of the Big Ten rivalries. I like some of the Big 12 rivalries, and as an SEC fan, I love some of the SEC rivalries. I mean, I love the Iron Bowl, which that'll always be a thing. But if you take away Alabama and LSU for a season, I'll be hurt. But if you create new rivalries, or bring some back, like fans in Texas, I know have been dying to bring back the Texas and Texas A&M rivalry, which is already starting to see some fireworks, come back from that rivalry because you don't see those two teams play anymore.
Exactly.
And I would love to see those two teams play anymore and play more and play again. But then again, you still can have your traditional rivalries. I mean, I would love to see a rivalry start brewing between Ohio State.
No,
and
Ohio
USC.
State. Yeah, we already have a rivalry.
Michigan and USC.
Ohio State and USC already have a rivalry, and it'll be so fun to just see that brew.
Or like Oklahoma and Georgia, or Texas and Alabama, who will play again this season. Not as conference rivals, but future conference rivals, and just you get to see. New rivalries born, and I think that's where you can see the beauty of the conference realignment. But then I understand the argument against it of why people don't like it. It really just you really just got to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence about it, but I think it will be exciting just to see these kids, especially like some people kind of hate on like the Big 12, the Pac-12 a little bit. It will be very interesting to see how those teams adjust in those conferences. I know I kind of touched base on this already, but it'll be fun to see how Lincoln Riley can adjust to the Big Ten, adjust to the different climates and those colder seasons.
How long will Lincoln Riley really be at USC? I mean,
I think after Caleb
he's a great
Williams,
coach, but I think that was a next step for him towards the NFL. That's personally my opinion. I think he'll eventually end up there. Kirby Smart, like not so much. I think Kirby Smart.
Oh yeah, he's sticking around at Georgia. But same with let's take another look at it. How about Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day? Do we think that they're staying in the Big Ten? I think the rumors that swirl with Jim Harbaugh every year
are coming up every year.
Every year at the end of the season, people are saying that Jim Harbaugh is leaving Michigan and taking an NFL job.
And every time the Bears, not to hate on your Bears, but every time the Bears get a new opening.
People want Harbaugh.
People have linked Ryan Day to the Bears.
Oh, I mean, that happened this year too. But
so
it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. But for the most part, I think those guys are obviously like Saban too. I think those guys are going to be there for a while.
Well, Saban
could be on the verge of retiring in a couple of years.
It all depends. Like for Saban though, his contract is through 2029. It really just depends on when he's ready and. I think he would be the person to help Alabama find its next successor.
100%.
And I've talked
That's probably what he's waiting for right now too.
And I've talked about this with other people. I feel for the guy who was immediately after Saban because you'll be expected to meet those same expectations that Saban met. And so, college football is changing, and I love it. And I think it'll be great for the sport. I think. What really needs to be toned down, and I'm all for it. I'm all for the players getting paid. I'm all for players getting transfer.
But it's getting to a point where it's too much. Like, do these players, we talked about, do teams want to compete for a national championship? Do these players want to compete for a national championship? Or are they just chasing the bag, trying to get as much money as they can before maybe their NFL career takes off, or maybe they won't have an NFL career?
I think that's where, it comes in, that same discussion comes in on the player level as well, because there's some are chasing the bag, some of them, and I get their reasoning, and I want them to get the bag, I want them to get paid, they deserve it. But I do think there are some out there that still want to compete for a national championship because, Ohio State almost had C.J. Stroud come back,
almost,
and
I
think NIL will allow that to happen.
Because of the fact that they don't have to worry about the money. Because most players will go to the NFL to get the money, and now they don't have to worry about that. But I just think, to me, it's more of a problem with kids leaving schools just because they want that money, and they don't really care about riding it out. Like, say at Ohio State, for example, like we don't have a ton of guys transferring out, but those guys that are transferring out, they're transferring out to get playing time at another school.
Yeah,
and
it
makes sense. And they want NIL too. But it's just like, what is it doing for them? Because if say they stay at Ohio State or these kids stay at Bama, you guys just lost a ton of transfers. It's like if they stay there, they're going to develop more.
Yeah.
Like Alabama and Ohio State are two very prestigious programs. That's nothing against any other programs like Georgia or just what I'm saying. Like what I'm trying to say is the kids transferring out
there.
I know. I feel like the kids that are transferring out of those schools is setting them further back. Because you're moving, like, you know what I'm saying? Just the competition that you're getting there and the coaching.
Out because, maybe there's guys that are just way ahead of them, and
they're just not getting the opportunity.
They don't see the field, and they want an opportunity to see what they got, and I'm for the players being able to transfer. I think it should be limited to an amount of times. I think it should be limited to reason.
Yeah, it's definitely excessive.
And I think NIL should be. There should be some guardrails, and that's the problem with the NCAA, which is just an absolute joke. We all know that. We all know what's going on with the NCAA.
Yep.
Why they should just be disbanded, or college football should break away from it. But it's just, there's a lot. It's a lot to take in with all the changes that are coming to college football, all the changes that we're already seing. But I'm along for the ride.
I'll always be along for the ride too.
I still love college football all the same.
I love it too, but I don't know if I can. The players definitely need to get paid, but NIL has just gotten, I think, way too far beyond than it needed to be, especially with recruiting players. When you talk about recruiting players, players are going to go where they're going to get the bag, for the most part. There's players that will go where they want to go, where they think they'll get developed the most. But majority of these high school athletes, these 4 and 5 stars, are going to go to the schools that are going to give them the most amount of money. And we're seeing it happen with commits like this past year, all the time. And
I mean, like I said, we see the changes that are coming. I'm for it. I mean, I'm for all these things. And to some degree, there are some things that need to be discussed that really beyond this general discussion that we're having. And that's not for us to determine. That's for the higher ups. But I mean, I'm along. Like I said, I'm along for the ride. And I'm
exactly
anxious. I'm anxious to see where it takes us. I mean, I'm already missing football season. And the underrated part of football for me is the off season. I love the off season.
I love the offseason too, and I mean, looking at the offseason right now, there's lots of stuff going on, and looking at the NFL Combine and the NFL Draft and specifics,
talking about
what happened this morning with Jalen Carter.
Jalen Carter, defensive tackle Jalen Carter, who is in the running, I don't know how it'll impact his draft stock, but he is a potential number 1 pick. I mean, he's a great player, great athlete. A lot of people think he's the best player in this draft, me included. And that's being a Bama fan who loves Will Anderson and loves Bryce Young. I think he's the best player in this draft. But just
he screwed up a little bit. I mean, we all make mistakes,
and we should let all the facts come out before
we go too in depth on
it.
And this is nothing against him.
It will shake up the draft. I do think.
I don't think he's going to be a top. I don't think he's going to be the first pick anymore.
I think he'll still be a top 15 pick. I don't know about top 10 or top 5.
I agree, but it's going to hurt his draft stock. Like Todd McShay said, he had character issues. He said that, weeks ago.
But there are things about Jalen Carter. I mean, he's been a leader for the Georgia Bulldog defense for 2 years. And beyond that, he's been there for, I think, four years. And he's really molded into a really great player and leader on that team. And, I mean, character issues, that's really for his teammates and coaches to determine.
That is true.
Because there was a story about him that came out last week about him, using his scholarship to pay for a player's meal plan. So I mean, the Jalen Carter stuff. I think it still will shake up the draft.
Yeah.
I think it makes.
But we all make stupid decisions. We've seen it happen in the draft in the past where it hurts players' draft stocks a little bit, but they still end up getting drafted. They still get their shot, and they wind up being very good.
But I do think it makes it easier for the Bears what to do with the number 1 pick, because I do think they're going to trade it. I mean, I don't think it's a secret at this point that they're looking to trade it. I mean, it's been announced by Schefter, Rappaport, all that media outlets have gotten their hands on what the Bears want to do with the number 1 pick. I do think it makes it easier on them to trade the pick.
Yeah.
Instead of
And to me personally, being a Bears fan, Ryan Poles is the Bears GM, and this is going to be his second year. This is his second offseason going in. And I don't think, after this news about Carter, I think he's done with Carter. I think as of right now, if we trade back and get the number 2 pick from the Texans, or trade back with the Colts and get the number 4 pick, I don't think the Bears will even give Carter a chance, just because of the way Ryan Poles wants classy guys on the Chicago Bears. He doesn't want someone that's going to shake up the team, or someone that may even risk having character issues. And so I think right now it's a given that if the Bears trade back and they have an early pick still, they're going for Will Anderson.
Either that, or they could go for an offensive lineman or an edge rusher like Will Anderson. It really all just depends on the kind of offer they get. I mean, and I've seen people say where it can make it harder for them to trade number 1 pick, because now if Carter slides, now all really that's up there in that top 5 besides quarterbacks is Will Anderson.
Exactly.
So if you trade back beyond 2, the Cardinals aren't going to trade. They have no reason to trade. They're going to stay at 3. So say if you trade with the Colts at 4, you risk giving up Will Anderson to the Cardinals.
That is true. But also there's some other rumors about the Bears trading even further back, say maybe with the Titans, getting the 11th or 12th pick, I believe they have, and trading for a defensive lineman with additional picks, because the Bears, obviously, I mean, they have holes everywhere, but they do need to beef up their defensive linemen, their edges, their offensive line. Obviously, need a couple weapons for Fields.
And I do think it makes it easier on them to trade back because say you trade back with the Texans who are just a pick back, you might not get the haul. You might not get a huge haul because moving from second to one is not
it's not much.
It's not much.
But it'll still be more than what we had, and we'll still have the chance to get what we wanted.
To pick Will Anderson or trade back even more, and maybe go for a receiver like Quentin Johnson,
or take the risk at getting Jackson Smith and the Jigba after sitting out the whole season. I think Jackson Smith and the Jigba is going to pan out great, but that's all to be determined because after sitting out a year due to a hamstring issue, it's going to be...
The combine starts, Thursday, the day that this episode is coming out. I mean, it'll be awesome to see, the quarterbacks, especially now. Bryce Young is not physically going to do anything at the combine. He's just doing interviews.
It's because he's 5'10".
I wouldn't say. The height would be an issue. I think it's more so the weight because Kyler Murray's around that same size. So is Russell Wilson. So was Drew Brees. But they were a lot beefier, a lot bulkier.
It's an injury risk too. It's an injury risk and.
Well, the injury risk can be subjective because if you really watch Bryce Young over the last couple of years at Alabama, he really only missed one game due to a minor shoulder injury, where he immediately played the next week against a top 5 Tennessee team and threw for over 400 yards and was a knuckleball field goal away from going to overtime and possibly winning that game. And so Bryce Young went up against some of the best in the SEC. He went up against Jalen Carter. He went up against Jordan Davis, who got drafted last year. Nakobe Dean. A lot of these guys are from Georgia. Went up against Harold Perkins from LSU. Yep. Against some of these guys from Tennessee, from the SEC. And Auburn, who also always has he took the 2021 Iron Bowl where he was sacked 7 times. I remember watching that game. He took a punishment in that game and still led the game.
Yeah, he can still take the hits. He can take the hits.
Now, granted, the guys in the NFL are a lot more polished than what they do. They're a lot bigger, but I still think that he can. What Bryce Young does so well is he keeps himself out of harm's way. Yes, he's trying to make a play. Yes, and people compare him to Tua a little bit because of the size issue, but Bryce Young is a lot more mobile than Tua, even though he doesn't he chooses to throw more than run. He does a better job. What got Tua in trouble is he held onto the ball too long in one spot, and he couldn't be as mobile as he wanted to be, and he would put himself in harm's way. And he saw it this season with
multiple times
where he got concussions, and he saw it back in those days at Alabama where he got the hip injury. But Bryce Young does a really good job of keeping himself out of harm's way, even when when he does choose to run. He does go out of bounds, or even if he thinks somebody's about to hit him, he'll just go down.
I agree, and he will be able to thrive and succeed if it's in the right system. And I mean that's for any football team. Like if you're put in the right system with the right offense, he will be a great NFL quarterback.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just, and that's another thing too. There's all those rumors about the Bears trading Justin Fields to get more picks, get more players, and take Bryce Young. To me, I think that's ridiculous. We're already building around Justin Fields. And to me, I don't want a 5'10" quarterback on the Bears.
But I could also see why. I mean, I can see their people's reasoning for maybe saying they should do that is because a lot of these GMs and a lot of these coaches, the Bears front office that's right now the coach Matt Eberflus and the GM Ryan Poles, they did not draft us.
That is true, but right now they already started. A
lot of these GMs like to get their guy. The guy
that is true, but they already started to build around him, and I think at this point right now, and after what he showed this year, y'all can agree with me or not. I think Justin Fields looked great this year. I think he looked phenomenal. I know he ran a little too much maybe, but he had to. There was points where he had no other choice but to run, and when you look at it from that perspective, he had no offensive line. You can argue all you want. He did not have an offensive line. And yes, he had a couple receiving weapons, but when he needed to throw the ball, he got the ball there. There was times where he didn't, but he made those still second-year quarterback mistakes. But I think he has a lot of room to grow this year, and if the Bears can make the right moves in this offseason, having over $100 million for free agency to be able to go and spend, and Ryan Poles can build around Justin Fields with that money.
And then, we're getting towards the end of the show. I want to end off with this. A player that people will be watching this weekend, and I think, say what you will about Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud and Will Levis. I'm not a big Will Levis fan. I like Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud as the top 2 quarterbacks. But a guy that really has a chance to shoot up in the draft boards as Florida's Anthony Richardson. When you dive deep into the tape, his issues really aren't that deep. He has great pocket awareness. He knows when to run, knows when to stay in the pocket. If you really dive deep, he knows how to make reads. He knows how to read a defense. And so you compare that with his athletic ability. I mean, the dude's a freak. I mean, I remember in one of the first games he ever got himself on the map is when I think it was the 2021 season. He did a backflip before the game started, and that was still when Emory Jones was the quarterback of Florida. But I remember that video going viral, and people were like, when this guy gets the reins of being quarterback at Florida, and call Florida season what it wasn't great, but still he showed flashes against like a team like LSU, who he put up more points against LSU than Bama did.
That is true.
And so.
It just depends though too, because anything can happen with NFL quarterbacks. We see it all the time.
But I have a feeling he's going to test like crazy at combine this weekend. I think he's going to have a good 40. I think he's going to have a good, he's a freak. And I think he's going to test really well. And I think that'll project him, maybe not over Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud, maybe over one of them. But I think he'll certainly at least solidify himself as one of the top quarterbacks in this draft.
And the teams need quarterbacks.
And I think if you put him in the right system, I think Carolina would be a great spot for him, because Carolina has had Cam Newton before, and people can compare Anthony Richardson to Cam Newton. And so I think Carolina would be a great spot. I think Atlanta would be a great spot for Anthony Richardson. And one of my buddies who's an Atlanta Falcons fan, he's going to get a kick out of me saying this, because I bang on the Falcons so much just to make fun of him. But I mean, if you're watching the combine this weekend, the guy to watch is Anthony Richardson. I think he's the main guy to watch in this combine, just because of the freak that he is, and I think the skills he still has. He has to prove himself, and he is a project. But I think he's a better polished quarterback than Will Levis is. I think Will Levis is the fifth best quarterback in this draft. I think even Hendon Hooker is above him in this draft. But we can get more into that in the next episode when it comes to quarterbacks. And
I agree, but I just want to end on the point. I know we already went in depth on it, but I want to know what y'all think about, do you think that these college football teams are still competing for a national championship? And yes, I think the teams are, but is it the players that are the issue? With the players transferring, going for NIL, what is going on? Are these teams, are these players, are these coaches actually wanting to win a national championship, or is it all about the money?
And I think that's a great point. And so, I mean, it's up to y'all to decide. I mean, some of y'all might disagree, some of y'all might agree. I mean, sometimes we disagree as well. So, I mean, let us know in comments. Tweet at us, message on Instagram.
Comment.
We're all for criticism.
Exactly. We're giving our opinions, so we want to hear yours too.
Exactly.
See what you guys have on our takes.
We know there's going to be hate out there,
by all means, we are going to embrace it. I don't care. So
exactly.
Tell me whatever you want to tell me. I do not care. And
exactly. And we plan to bring on some guests on this podcast as well. We're going to try and do this bi-weekly. Tuesday and Thursday, I think, is where we want to start off. And if things go well, then we can start getting into more times a week. But yeah, we're along for this ride. We want y'all to embrace it as well. We want y'all to not only subscribe, but just
we want y'all. We want feedback. We want feedback too, because we're in this together. We're all in this ride together.
We're learning this. I mean, we're literally in classes for this type of stuff. I intern at one of the local stations here in Mobile, to where I can get better at this type of stuff. So it's a learning process, especially when it comes to our editing and our delivery. But we're here for you guys. We're here for you guys. We want you guys to.
Also, if you guys want us to talk about something on the show, throw us a topic. Throw us something that we can talk about, debate, and go at for hours. But not hours. Not actually, because nobody's going to stay here and listen to us for hours.
Exactly.
Maybe not. We'll see. Maybe my girlfriend or my dad. But
I think that's going to do us for this episode, guys.
We hope you enjoyed Back of the Endzone podcast.
Go subscribe, hit the bell notification to get a notification every time a new episode drops. Go subscribe on Apple and YouTube. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Go rate. Go follow social medias. It's in the outro and in the links below. It'll post it in the descriptions below, in our links to our social media pages. So just we enjoyed this first episode, and we hope we can grow this into something bigger.
And we hope you guys enjoyed as well. Thank you for joining the first episode of the Back of the Endzone podcast. I'm Josh Reisick, and this is Bryant Kleski.
Peace out.